Hi everyone, I wanted to commend you again on a great discussion. This time we were looking at Unit 4, principally the Mexican period and the US-Mexico War. Once again, you all did a good job of talking to each other about issues that can be quite controversial in a very civil tone, but also you used evidence by and large to support your ideas. And again, remember that's one of the things that we're most looking for and trying to do with this discussion board is interpret historical evidence in order to respond to one another and think more deeply about the things that we're studying. I just wanted to make a few brief comments. I'm going to try really hard to keep them brief. This period of time is one that I've studied quite a bit and that I usually end up saying too much about. So I just wanted to emphasize a couple of kind of big picture ideas about this unit. First of all, this period between the late 1700s and the US-Mexico War is a time of major transition and shifting in New Mexico and the larger region that is today the US-Mexico borderlands. Of course, there's the shift from this area being part of the Spanish Empire to becoming part of the Mexican nation. As we read about, the Mexican nation was on very unsure footing for a number of reasons as it began its existence as an independent entity. That instability in central Mexico, political infighting, but also large debts to European powers like Great Britain and France played a major role in kind of that problem that we saw for New Mexico and the frontier, that the central government was, I was going to say less than willing, but was unwilling to, excuse me, to recognize the problems that people in the North faced. They were unwilling to recognize the stability that had been part of the late colonial period that had come through subsidies from the crown to support gift giving and so on. So as we saw before, one of the last governors during the 17th century was Juan Bautista de Anza. Through kind of shrewd and violent means, he was able to broker a peace negotiation with the Comanches. By 1786, that peace agreement also included Navajos and Utes. And then through the peace establishments or establecimientos de paz, the Apaches were also brought in to the peace arrangement, if not in the way that the Spaniards intended, as was mentioned in the Mile. So the point here is that the late colonial period with the Bourbon reforms, the way that those translated into action in New Mexico and the frontier, it was a time of peace and stability. That all eroded under the Mexican administration, and by and large, people in New Mexico kind of liked the way that life went as best they could under the provisions of the Constitution of 1824. That created a federal system of government, much like is the case in the United States. In this sense, we mean a federal system in which power is shared between a national government or a central government and state and local governments. Because of that structure, local ayuntamientos or town councils in New Mexico, as well as the government in Santa Fe, was able to have a lot of autonomy to do whatever they could do without the financial backing of the central government to address the issues that they had. That all fell apart, of course, with the Siete Leyes and the Constitution of 1836 that was established under that interesting character, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. Of course, he didn't single-handedly replace the Constitution. He had the support of the deputies in the Congress in Mexico City, but the new Constitution was kind of a function of the centralist faction in Mexico gaining sway, at least in the mid-1830s. When that happened, Albino Perez was assigned to be governor in New Mexico. He didn't understand the situation on the northern frontier. He made some poor choices, even though he had some big plans that might have benefited the local region and its people. But in the end, his inability to kind of allow for that autonomy for the ayuntamientos, for the pueblos, and the people in northern New Mexico was part of what fomented the Guerra de los Chimayosos, or the Chimayoso War, or the Revolt of 1836, or excuse me, 1837. It has various titles depending on who is giving the title. But again, in that revolt, those conditions of the frontier that weren't really understood by the central government, by Albino Perez, came to a head. Governor Armijo made a name for himself by putting down the revolt, and his problem was essentially that this thing might disrupt the Santa Fe trade, might disrupt the economy and his position of power, those around him. So what I'm kind of trying to lay out here are some of the things we didn't talk about in our discussions on the timeline and elsewhere, or at least didn't discuss in a lot of detail, that set the stage for the U.S.-Mexico War. Of course, the War of a Thousand Deserts, which I didn't quite touch on, was also a product of the conditions that I've just been talking about. But again, Mexico was in no position in a variety of ways to fight a war against the United States in the 1840s. Given everything that we've just been discussing, it's significant that the Mexican nation was able to wage the kind of defense that they did for as long as they did. What we're going to look at going forward is the aftermath of that war, which I just sort of totally glossed over in my comments here because we talked about it quite a bit elsewhere in our work this unit. But we're going to look at the way that the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo tried to protect the rights of the former Mexican citizens living in the ceded territories, which included New Mexico, Texas, and California, and of course the areas that are today the states of Arizona, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, Wyoming. So it's a large chunk of territory. As we'll see, the promises of the treaty were not fully kept or realized under U.S. jurisdiction. We're also going to look at the ways in which indigenous peoples continued to face discrimination and new warfare under the U.S. administration. So we'll be looking at that through the lens of what it meant to be, or for New Mexico to be, an American territory. All right, as always, please let me know if you have any questions, and I will be talking to you soon.